Welcome everyone to the BIM Coordinator Summit 2024. Today I'm going to be presenting on embedding cost and carbon in digital workflows. But first of all, before I get into this presentation, I should introduce myself. My name is Ross Griffin and I am the founder of KOSMOS. We are a digital cost, carbon and quantity surveying consultancy. I'm also the founder of the Fifth Dimension, a SaaS product that tracks cost and carbon using digital information. Today's presentation is quite interesting from our perspective and hopefully for yours too. We are going to introduce the importance of embedding cost and carbon in digital workflows, and we're going to present a case study where we have embedded this exact thing. And from our perspective as cost and quantity surveyors, we believe that the future of our discipline is absolutely embedding our workflows into the digitization of our projects in our industry. But first, the industry challenge. To date, quantity surveyors and cost managers have not really transitioned over into the BIM world or the digital transformation or the digital world. Traditional cost and carbon estimates take numbers of weeks or numbers of months even to produce, and quite a big team depending on the size of the projects, of course. And we're talking about, you know, huge capital investment projects here, both public and private. That's where we believe that this will offer an awful lot of value for our clients. But some of the challenges we have is the lack of integration between cost and carbon information. We also see that inefficiency in traditional workflows like 2D quantification, for example, reporting in paper-based. I hope none of you are still doing that. But also the information we're tracking on these projects, what happens to that? And this is one for us. The shortage of QSs in the market. We can all see the amount of job advertisements out there for QSs, senior QSs, mid-tier juniors. There's a shortage, and the only way we're going to combat that shortage is, in our view, digitization. By doing more with less, by doing more with the QSs we have in our teams, then being able to facilitate more clients working on more projects, by using digital workflows and digital information. So the question is the digital carbon QS. You know, why is the QS grabbing a piece of BIM? And grabbing sounds very aggressive, but it's not really. And building information management is about information, and the QS is another stakeholder within the project lifecycle that produces and uses information produced within that project. So it makes sense that the QS is part of the BIM world, the BIM workflow, and the digital transformation. Why is the QS grabbing a piece of carbon? Well, we believe in KOSMOS that cost and carbon are effectively the same thing. Carbon is just another currency, and the process of managing carbon is identical to the process of managing cost. The process of procuring cost is the same as the process of procuring carbon. So it makes sense from our perspective that the QS manages this within the project lifecycle. And why should we collaborate to save the QS time? It's not really about saving time for QSs. It's about being more efficient in our project delivery. We believe that by producing digital workflows and managing information produced by other stakeholder groups, that we can improve the efficiency of the project delivery, meaning that we can reduce the amount of time it takes to deliver such projects. So today we're going to discuss a case study, a project we're working on. It's a big infrastructure project. There's 10 new stations. It's about 30 kilometers of tunnels, and the baseline embodied carbon is around 310 tons of CO2. Now, I just need to caveat this. This is only embodied. This is not whole life cycle carbon. It's just embodied. The ambition for this project is quite severe, I would say. They want to reduce the embodied carbon by 50%. It's the client's perspective that they can, by implementing these workflows, that they can reduce the embodied carbon by 50%. And it's wonderful to see clients take the lead on this, because at the end of the day, it needs to be the clients that take the lead. The rules around managing cost and carbon has changed somewhat, at least for the cost perspective. Traditionally, we would wait till the end of a design gateway to develop a cost plan, a cost estimate, and then we go back to our clients and say, well, the project's gone up 10%, 5%. We have a problem here. What should we do? So we believe that by implementing digital workflows and real-time updates, we can give real-time information to our clients. So the question we ask ourselves is the current design solution within the cost and carbon budget? And so at the end of each gateway, of course, you're going to ask this question, but a design gateway might take 3 to 4 months to get to. So we're asking this question on a weekly, fortnightly, and monthly basis. We're assessing the information. And if the answer to this is no, we're above the budget, what needs to happen? We need to revisit the design. We need to look at certain components that we believe are over the budget, and we need to engineer out the carbon or value engineer the particular design solution from a cost and carbon perspective. So we do this on a repetitive basis every week, every fortnight, every month with the client, with the design team, with the stakeholder groups. And then we continue that process next week, next month, etc. We rinse and repeat this. And it might not necessarily be the entire project we're evaluating. It could be certain components of the project. But then again, it might be the entire project. So by setting a baseline, you're able to understand where your cost drivers and carbon drivers are, and that's where your main focus becomes in the initial period. But what if we ask the question and the answer is yes? Well, wonderful. We continue our design to a completed design. We keep going with that design because we believe that we're on or under that cost and carbon budget. But this is repetitive, and it's not at the end of the gateway, as I mentioned. This is every day, every week, every month on the project. The requirements we're reporting then. So traditional process was not an option. We couldn't possibly manually measure the design every week, every fortnight, every month for the client. The level of resource it would take would be significant, meaning that the cost would be significant, and the information we'd be using by the time we would have these estimates would be outdated. So it wasn't real time enough for the project. It takes too long, of course, to do this type of stuff manually, especially on a 28-kilometer tunnel within 10 stations. So we needed to pave a way for something new. So the approach was a roadmap. Now in KOSMOS, we have the KOSMOS roadmap for cost, which is theoretically the same as the KOSMOS roadmap for carbon. As we mentioned, cost and carbon are the same thing. So this follows the project lifecycle, and we have certain milestones within that and tasks that we do to carry that out. So within the roadmap, we focus on baselining the project, understanding what the baseline is for cost and carbon, basically where do we believe a traditional design solution to be, and then we're setting our targets against that, reducing embodied carbon by 50%, and delivering a reduced cost and higher quality, higher value for the client. And this happens on a weekly, monthly, and a basis, as I mentioned. We're sitting with the design teams, the BIM coordinators, discipline leads on a weekly basis, discussing with them what needs to be done in the project. And like that, the milestones of what we look at, when we look at it, etc., are clearly defined before we start the project. This means that everybody understands that the cost manager or quantity surveyor is going to be sitting very close to you during the project lifecycle, and will expect to be able to sit down for a half an hour each week just to discuss the project. What has developed? What does the information look like? Or what has changed since last week? How are we targeting a particular component for value engineering or carbon reduction, etc.? So the approach from our perspective is the BIM quantities from the models, manual quantities we will always have to manually measure because not everything is designed at certain stages of the project and the technical knowledge. That becomes the cost and carbon estimate. And what feeds into the estimate once you have the quantities is your cost rate database, so your unit prices, and then your carbon emission database and carbon assemblies. So your carbon emissions for certain components and then the assemblies of those components. And that is then visualized in a dashboard to our clients so they can see what has changed since last week, last month, etc., etc. The BIM execution plan, however, becomes a very important part of this because we need to be clear about what our requirements are around what information is going to be delivered from the different stakeholder groups, what structure is that going to be in, what are we delivering as quantity surveyors, cost managers, what structure is that going to be in. So the BIM execution plan is key there. And from a cost and carbon perspective, we need to understand the different information, different deliverables or milestones within the design development. What LOD are we talking about? What LOI are we talking about? And the BIM execution plan should clearly define that along the entire project lifecycle, REBA stages here, for example. So for the 5D requirements, we have our own internal document that we've developed. Some key focus areas are IFC, exports. How do we exchange information from a 5D, 6D perspective? 5D and 6D are very similar in terms of what we deliver, cost and carbon, the quality of that information and accuracy, and what is not included. What is not included is very important because it's certain timelines, certain components aren't included because the design is not there yet. So we need to understand that. And then what information is required from our perspective for the different disciplines, for example, structures or superstructure. What does that information look like? How are we naming things? How are we tagging things that might differ from a standard design team tagging or naming? And more importantly, scope gaps. What's missing? What's going to be missing? What are we definitely not going to model? We need to identify that area to understand it. And the model becomes a super important part of our process because we want to automate quantification, meaning that the model becomes key communicator. And there's a matrix we developed along with some of our partners to clearly identify to the BIM coordinators and managers exactly what we're talking about here, like property parameters. We need to understand some of this information. It becomes very important and key to our deliverables, like the gross floor area, etc., of different components of the different buildings. The takeoff, what will we quantify from the model and what will we not quantify from the model? We should identify that because it helps the design team to understand exactly where we're looking. Custom parameters needed in the takeoff, certain information that we have to have in the model because it improves our quality of information flow. Some of this information might be in the specifications, but it's better to have them in the model. Here are examples of the information we expect for the different parameters, just to give the design team a flavor of what we're talking about. And of course, then who has responsibility for the delivery? Who does it? When and how much? And so all of that becomes quite clear. What the result of that is on our projects is that we increase quality in the design information because we're now looking at the design information from a non-design perspective. We increase accuracy because we're looking at the information over and over and over and over again, like the quantities, the estimates, the carbon calculations. We're repeating that process over and over again. And that brings clarity to the project because everybody is working together in that collective environment. What I would say is that from our perspective, ICMS becomes a very key component for us. International cost and management standards. We use ICMS 3 for our cost and carbon structure on all our projects so that we can benchmark and we have repetitiveness across the projects. And we look at our business and from a kind of a global perspective. That's why we use international standards. We can always map to local standards, but our international standards are key because they're cross-border. It doesn't tie us into one jurisdiction. And so carbon emissions database, Just to explain this a little bit, where do we get our carbon information from? We take it from open source data, like Materials 2050, for example. We get actual EPDs for certain materials in the location where the project is and what we expect that supplier to be. All of that feeds into the assemblies, which is, for example, the different materials within a foundation, which feeds up into our carbon estimate. All of this needs to be revised and reviewed on an ongoing basis. Processing database and reporting platform, the fifth dimension, as I mentioned earlier on, we've a SaaS business. We use this for analytics of information. Our revisions of our estimates are loaded. We can analyze changes, etc., and visualize them for the client. That becomes an important part of the analytics and digital workflow from our perspective, at least within KOSMOS. Data model then updates to the quantities are now reflected in both the cost and carbon estimates, as we mentioned. Once we've mapped the original components from the models, we're able to quickly update the calculations by importing models, and those automatic connections are there, meaning that our quantities in ICMS format with our price information and carbon information becomes updated. And then that visualization dashboard is automatically updated for our client. And the visualizations become important here because information on such a large project become difficult to understand the overview. So visualizations are key. And we try to use these within the project, heat mapping, etc., just to show cost drivers, carbon drivers, etc., for the client. The outcome of all of this, I guess, we've put a process in place. We have standardized that process. We're using international standards. We've all agreed the BIM execution plan with the other stakeholder groups. We now work to a certain quality level and information level within the design development. We all know the information that we're pulling out. We're revising that as we update design information, design develops, etc., etc. We're using this information to influence the decision making going forward and the design development, meaning that we're not getting to the end of the design stage and redesigning. Non-design discipline evaluating the design. Contractors get to work straight away because they don't need to remodel. The models are very good quality. Real-time updates, quote unquote, real-time information from the design as it's developing. Improved collaboration because we're speaking to the design teams every single day. And transparency for the client because they have transparency on the information. The result being so far 110,000 tons of carbon embodied reduced. We've about 2 to 3 of a team on the project. We're processing about 100 unfederated models. And our time to do an update is 1 to 2 days, depending on the level of change. So we're rapid updates here for cost and carbon. And so on our project, the cost and carbon management strategy is weekly, fortnightly, monthly. And it takes us a day or two to update that on a weekly basis, constantly, obviously, embedded in the project or process. And we have 2 or 3 cost carbon managers on it, quite a small team. In comparison to traditional model where we'd wait to the very end, it'd take potentially 8 to 4 weeks to do a full calculation, both cost and carbon. And if you're manually quantifying, you'll need a team of junior QSs there with on-screen or even paper-based measurement. It could be 8 to 12. So the efficiencies we're creating here by managing information is really come to the front. This does not only save time, cost, and carbon, but a better result on quality around the entire material being produced by people, because we're processing that information, we're using it. It means that it's quality assured over and over and over again, as opposed to the traditional model where it's just the back end, where everybody's under pressure. We're doing it consistently throughout the project lifecycle. So the future outlook in the last minute here is that this will become business as usual. It's inevitable. We're moving in that direction. BIM workflows, embedded cost and carbon within that. You will not need to ask for cost carbon and BIM on your project. It will be business as usual. It is already in other jurisdictions. It will be here also. It's happening in Denmark. It's going to happen in Ireland. So in the last 30 seconds, I'm really on the clock. It's wonderful. I think it's my first time ever delivering. The 5 key takeaways. Embedding cost and carbon needs to be a client-led decision. It needs to be client ambition. The digital carbon QS needs to be involved from the very beginning, reviewing the BIM execution plan, setting up the standards, etc., etc. Regular communication is key. Everybody needs to work together in order for this to succeed. Do not wait until the end of a design stage to begin the work. You need to work in parallel. Super important. And information management is everybody's responsibility. Cost and carbon is everybody's responsibility. And together, it is achievable. Alone, it is impossible. Some of you will hear us talk about that before. But use your network, guys, to help for advice. Write to us here in KOSMOS. We're more than happy to chat to people about the process. You'll find my details here on the next slide. For sure, get out your phones, have a look, connect with us on LinkedIn. More than happy to chat to people on this. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope to have some interesting comments and questions come afterwards. Thank you.